I know you write a lot about France as well. I just wanted to touch base because I saw you wrote a piece in Jacobin on the murder of the 17-year-old Nahel, I believe, is his
Mhm.
name in France, and the uprisings that have followed. Just so we can touch on this story for our audience, if you could just give people a rundown of where we're at that moment, and what the significance of the protests are.
Well, I think the protests are, of course, in response to the appalling police killing of a 17-year-old. There's been a lot of commentary on the fact that the 17-year-old was driving a stolen car at the time of his murder. But of course, there's not a death penalty for joyriding or driving without a license. We've seen in the last few days, particularly in the initial days after the killing last Tuesday, these very angry protests. Some of them were more kind of solemn, but others not. And there was, of course, rioting. And what we've seen from almost the entire political mainstream is this claim that, well, this is the result of part of French society that doesn't fit in. And we've seen the police unions in particular claiming that there's a problem, that they're not being allowed to do their job. And they've issued a statement, the main police union, saying, well, we're at war. So on the left, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, France Insoumise, in particular, they've sort of said, well, no, the problem isn't the police aren't being allowed to do their job, but that the government doesn't have police under control. In recent years, we've seen lots of these kind of protests and political interventions by police who are sort of seeking to direct government policy and show that they're not going to be told what to do by elected politicians. And I think that's very worrying. And of course, it's good that part of the left is saying, well, this is a political issue. The anger we've seen in these protests is because these communities have been abandoned for decades. They're the young people who are subject to constant police harassment, who lack hopes even of employment and so on. So I think on the one hand, parts of the left are trying to show that this is a political anger, but both the far right and indeed Emmanuel Macron's government are just trying to make it a problem of unruly young people. Macron even blamed it on the video games.
Oh,
It, it,
that's an old trick. That's an old trick from the U.S. On mass shootings too, right? It's not the guns, it's not the structure, it's personal pathology and people's interests.
yeah, I mean, video games seems particularly 1990s as
Yes,
an explanation.
maybe
But
rap
of
music too.
Yes. So, and of course, also like blaming bad parenting and this kind of thing. But I think there's this very strong attempt to make it about the idea that minorities don't fit in, don't belong, rather than confront the issue of police violence.
Yeah, last question on this. I want to talk about your book, but I just curious how this fits into larger racial animus and a reckoning with that within France.
Yeah, I mean, one of the quite strange phenomena in French politics in the last couple of years has been this idea, which is that, well, whenever we want to talk about state racism or about sort of the condition of ethnic minority communities in France, that this is some sort of US cultural import, that all this idea of race and placing people in these racial categories is itself somehow foreign to France, and after all, doesn't the Republic represent everyone equally? Part of the story, in fact, yesterday was that the president of Ile-de-France, like the region around Paris, announced that a school named after Angela Davis was going to have to change its name because, of course, Angela Davis stands for this racialized conception of politics, which France can't accept. But I think that there's a big difference on the left as well, in the sense that when there've been riots before or sort of outbursts of anger in very sort of majority minority communities, often the left has kind of not really known what to say, or sort of joined in the idea that these are just sort of young people acting out who don't really belong to the Republic. Whereas I think this time, also because of some of the change and some of the new MPs in the National Assembly, we're seeing a more of a kind of political and parts of the left who are sort of recognizing this problem with the racism in France and sort of not going along still with this kind of supposedly colorblind idea that these issues can kind of be swept under the carpet. But also, it has to be said, overall, I think it's a very dangerous moment because we are seeing not only that the far right is strong in general, strong electorally, that the government parties are taking up a lot of their rhetoric around so-called softness on Islam and so on. But also, at the moment, we are seeing fascist street groups organizing with a kind of a level of organization and indeed of violence that we hadn't seen for decades. You know, like fascists going out in the streets and beating up young people on these protests. So I think it's a very worrying moment, but in a way, the revolt surely does also point to this problem of racist police violence and the treatment of the so-called children of immigration, as ethnic minorities are always called in the Republic.